Okay, Debbie, thank you very much. So, two, I wouldn't say bleak outlooks, but certainly less cheerful than some of the stuff we're seeing currently in the newspapers, in which people are celebrating change and progress, and almost a bit of boosterism going on in the media, saying we can overcome our problems. But two quite careful warnings from our colleagues about how difficult this could be. I'm very struck, Joe. I could imagine this being turned, your proposition being turned into a draft speech for a chief executive, um, perhaps in the early part of June after they've heard the Queen's speech and they've got a bit more idea about their budgets. Um, just saying, like Donald Rumsfeld, that we now know what we don't know, how we're going to go forward. But Joe, what kind of thing would you try and say to, say, a local authority chief executive? Because after all, some of them will have made speeches like that at the beginning of the pandemic. They will have said, we're not going to leave anybody behind. We're going to check on every household. We're going to make sure that, people have food supplies. We're going to check on the elderly. We're going to make sure people are going to be safe. We're going to mobilize everything we can get our hands on, not just money. What kind of speech do you think they might make looking forward to the next stage with your kind of caveats in it? Oops, I think you're on mute, as usual. Nope, you're still.
There we are. I'm unmuted. One of the things we've learned out of the handling of the pandemic is where things have gone badly wrong. And test and trace has, when the ex-head of the Treasury says it has been the most expensive failure in the whole of his time in government, that is quite a statement to come out from Nick McPherson. Now, what we know actually is the test bit worked quite well. The trace bit didn't work. Why the trace bit didn't work is they tried to do it nationally. My daughter told me this morning that she'd had, by 10 o'clock, she'd had 2 phone calls, both of which were scams, telling her that she would be imprisoned if she didn't ring this number back within half an hour because she'd been caught doing some fraud, right? Most of us now know that if we don't recognize a telephone number, we don't answer it because we know it's a scam. So attempting to do that tracing nationally was bound to fail. And actually, the minute it got handed back to local insight and knowledge, it's worked a lot more successfully. And we saw a variety of places go into that. And bit by bit, we're now getting the right solution, which is using the muscle of purchasing power to get a really robust and affordable testing model with a lot of local tracing. So this is, I am not suggesting that every place becomes an island. What I'm saying is that that's a brilliant illustration of how we've got to have a different balance and recognize what is the strength of locality. The second thing, which I think we need to recognize, is that people have become much more conscious of their place over the last, right? The one thing you've been allowed to do is walk, right? That means for lots of people, their knowledge of their place was, how do I get from my home to wherever I'm getting transport to or whatever. And as you started to walk, people have got a much stronger sense of where they live at, I think, coming out of this. So what I'd be saying is, let's build on that. And what do you want to say is, what can be, in the same way that companies look out for what's our USP, I think part of the job of a local authority chief executive is to say, what's my place's USP? And how do I build on that? And if I can find something that's distinctive that people really appreciate about the place, I've got a really important building block for the future. And some of those USPs will be in the collective history of the place. So it's not, it's not that everyone's got to pretend they're going to be the sort of new technology center of the universe. There are concentrations of that. You find what is the thing that can give our place a difference. How can I get pride in our place? How can I get connection in our place? You mentioned in there looking after people who've been isolated. Developing a collective sense of we're in this together in a place. Without doubt, the biggest single mistake that the government made was covering up for Dominic Cummings, right? Cummings allowed, there's one rule for them and a different rule for us, right? What local government can embrace is we're in this together, and we're going to get out of this together. And I think that's a really motivating line to empower your staff and to sell to your people.
Let me ask Debbie a question. 10 years ago, when the Conservatives came in, we had two strikingly different approaches to reform. We had Eric Pickles, who came into local government and simply said, your budgets are cut. You have to publish everything you spend, get on with it, and left local authorities to go and figure out how they were going to survive. Andrew Lansley, on the other hand, came in with a plan and pushed his plan through. And it seemed that had many of the failings, Debbie, that you described. What's your reflection on those two approaches, which were encapsulated almost within one government? Because it strikes me that local government in the first 5 years did actually cope with very dramatic cuts, but because it was left to local discretion. What's your thoughts on that reflection?
I think the former worked better. Certainly from where I was working mainly in local government at that stage and helping them achieve some of those cuts that they had to make. And they were given a target. It's a bit like being presented with COVID. They had to find a way to overcome them. And they did, and they used a lot of imagination. They took a lot of care. It was very much user service driven. So they always kept the needs of the end user at the heart of all the changes that were made. But they came up with a remarkable amount of initiatives to try and save money. One I remember was right first time, every time. I mean, how simple an approach is that? And it worked, by using that approach. They stripped out a lot of non-value adding activities and they addressed key source of challenges and problems and solved them. So that did seem to work very well from where I was sitting.
And now, Joe, you went through a list of things which would fall into the category that Debbie described as significant cultural changes. So if you're going to lead in local government, not being afraid of a blame culture, being prepared to challenge regulatory frameworks, willingness to use what you described there as identity politics, really, pick something that shows that there's something peculiar about your part of Yorkshire or your part of Kent, and that describes a character or a strength that can be applied across everywhere. These are big cultural changes for public sector managers whose ethos has been, do not get into the direct line of fire, let the lawyers sort it out, stick to process, be precautionary, and, don't get me started on Grenfell, really.
But let me give you just two illustrations back, one from each side of the political managerial divide. No one has ever accused Sir Richard Leese, leader of Manchester, of being a quiet mouse, right? But by God, he embodies that kind of Mancunian spunk. And, there's a great joke about Manchester where I'll tell, apologies to any Brummies on the call. When the NEC was opened, somebody wrote a letter into the Guardian and said, Birmingham's status as second city is now surely unchallenged. And the next day, a letter came in from Manchester, delighted at this resurgence of civic pride in Birmingham, saying for far too long London had claimed second city status unchallenged. Only a Mancunian could get off of that. But Richard embodied that sort of real Mancunian spunk. On the managerial side, Tom Reardon's leadership of Leeds has been spectacular. And, Leeds is now a city of over 800,000 people. It is transforming at a pace, and the ambition is absolutely stunning. And I'll give as an illustration of that, because I think it's really quite interesting. As Tom came into Leeds had a disastrous children's services, really problematic. But and quote, normal safe solution would be to try and stop Leeds having a poor children's service department. They didn't have that aspiration. The aspiration they set is, we'll make Leeds a child-friendly city. Says that requires a good children's service department, but that's not the objective. The objective is putting kids center stage for Leeds, right? And it's that sort of switch, framing your ambition in a way which you can take out to people. Because frankly, if you say my ambition is to get our children's service department to be better, most of us are going to say, well, get on with it, mate. That's what you're paid for. Saying to it, our aim is to make the city child friendly, actually brings everyone into the exercise. That's the switch. So it's just a slight reframing of what you're doing out of the organisational into outcomes.
Well, that Rebecca we've got a question coming in from Rebecca asking about, what are the kind of practical skills that leaders need? That question of, do they lead by targets, or do they lead by ambitions, and that encapsulating objective outcomes? Debbie, what's your view on the pros and cons of those, or is it just really depend on that targets have their place and outcomes and philosophies have their place depending on what challenge you're facing?
Absolutely, that is what I believe. I don't think there's one size fits all. I'm not a big believer in targets for target's sake. I think they can drive completely the wrong behaviours. So if you have targets, they have to be extremely well thought through before you introduce them. They don't necessarily even drive improvement. They can just maintain the status quo if you're not careful. And I've seen heard of some very perverse behaviours by people to meet targets. But having said that, some of my senior executives that I've managed throughout the years have struggled without a target, because it has given them a bit of a security blanket, if you like, and a bit of a target to work to. So I've always tried to give stretch targets. Personally, I quite like those, which sort of overcome that, but gives them something to work to. But my son worked for quite a long time as a senior engineer at Dyson. Now, their approach is quite different, because he didn't even have a job description. He was told what the outcome was he had to achieve and just deliver it. No targets, no performance management. And the whole of their culture was driven around personal accountability and getting people in the company with the right motivations and the right ways of working, so that they knew they would be achievers, basically, and they'd work on their own volition to do whatever was needed to get the job done. And the culture and the whole feeling of that organisation, when you go into it, was really quite dramatically different to anything I've ever experienced before. And they certainly got the goods delivered.
Joe, can I ask you a question? I don't know the answer to this myself, but in a place like Leeds or in Manchester, do the heads of what are called anchor institutions ever actually sit down together? So the chief exec of the local authority, the vice chancellor, the heads of the college, the heads of the hospitals, the three biggest companies, the rail, the chief constable, all as the people who are major employers, drivers, all of them who, have transport fleets, they've got computer systems. We've had periods of shared services and things, but in placemaking, do they sit down and talk about what they're going to do for their place and how they might help one another out, or are they stuck in their silos? Joe?
I mean, I think in the successful places, you've seen that change. Leeds has a really good interface between health and local government. And remember, in health world, Leeds used to be the sort of headquarters, right? It's only recently that everyone's flocked back to London. So Leeds is one of the big anchor institutions of Leeds is health world. So that relationship has really improved. And universities are quite critical. And I think one of the interesting things, particularly in the northern universities, is northern city universities it's really interesting when you see that interface as universities as drivers of change in a place, as when you start to realize the footprint which these institutions have on a place and how the things go together. And that is, again, switching from, and I think this has come back to, a curious side effect of Eric Pickles. If you ain't got the money, you need to get some allies to help you do stuff, don't you? One of the difficulties of having lots of, if you've always have got the money, you think, well, I can do it, right? If you haven't got the money, you've got to find friends to help you do stuff. And so one of the consequences of this, and so this is not advocating austerity, but one of the consequences of that was that clever people realized they had to reach out and engage. And once you start on that journey, it gets a lot better. And what we need for that is not dramatic, big structural stuff, but actually starts. I mean, what one of our slogans is start anywhere, go everywhere. So wherever you start, keep going, right? Start where you can get some momentum and build on it. There is never a perfect place to start, but the best place to start is where you've got a chance of winning. Now, some people will describe that as quick wins, but I'm describing it as finding that chink when you can build, because once you've got a working relationship, you can build on it, you can do more, and it's that then you do get continuous improvement, because then the other side comes back and says, can you help me with this, because I think you've got a stake in this too, and then suddenly you can build up on that, but you've got to build on that confidence by starting somewhere. So start somewhere.
Okay, so a powerful message there about recognizing uncertainty, recognizing what is unknown, start honestly. Last word to you, Debbie. I mean, you've given us space, brace, and pace, which seem to me to be wise phrases, which we shall tweet out afterwards. But one final word from you.
I can't think of one. No, I think listening to everything we've heard, I think that, I mean, I wouldn't like to think it's a gloomy picture at all. I think there is a lot of good work has been done. I think the lessons that come out of it will be absolutely fantastic and almost as they'll be as inspirational really as the pace of change has been through the years. And I'm sure we will all arrive in a far better place as a result of this. I quite believe that.
Okay, well, listening to the two of you, I think one thing I've taken is that leaders in the next phase are going to need a new kind of courage to face up to these challenges and to lead. So can I thank Joe Simpson from the Leadership Centre and Debbie Simpson from the Institute for Continuous Improvement in Public Services. ICiPS conference programme starts on the 20th of May. Please follow the podcasts and live streams that we've been doing, and hopefully we'll help equip people to face the challenge that ahead. So that's all from City View and our Westminster studio, and thanks to both of my guests this evening. Thank you.